Alright, so first, I'm going to go over all the custom variables on your player entity. So for the first, 5, these are just for your basic settings on your main menu floating interaction page. So it'll be like, if the music is on, you have a toggle for that. That's the music variable. And then the first person variable is also a toggle. And then the volume is being referenced here. Next, the nickname variable just stores the player's in-game name, which is their name in Genshin. For variables that look like this, like 7, 8, 9, these are storing the timestamps for different save slots. They basically show the date that it's being saved and also how much playtime they have in your stage. This one shows if they're in cutscene. Number 11 is like, it's used for dialogue. So if you set it to yes, it will exit the dialogue. And we're going to use that in the node graph. Number 12 shows if they've selected the dialogue option yet. So default is no. Number 13 is, okay, I think I named their weirds, but basically it's if those options should show up. Number 14 is the time. Okay, number 14 to 20, they're all for the UI. They're just basic, like, time is just, it's either day or night, because for our UI, we're just using it like this. So it'll say like day 1, day 2, night 1. And here's the objective stuff. So this one's referencing the objective image, which is the variable that's gonna hold an index from for the asset. You basically find the index of the asset you want to reference. And then these, you can put like a quest or objective in this string variable. And then this is just the location. And that's mostly it. Okay, these are also just for the timestamps of different saves. For this stage, we only have 5. And then for variables 23 to 27, these are each referencing one of the save slots. So it's checking if the save slot is actually being used. So at default, none of them being used, but so like save 1 is for save slot number 1, 2 is for save slot number 2, and so on. This one I'm gonna skip because it's just for an optional keyboard. This is what is being referenced. So when like the player is typing on this keyboard, this is overwritten. But I won't go into too much detail for this. This is also for the keyboard, just checking like, I guess how many letters or characters they've typed, and if it's in caps lock. Alright, so number 32 was just how much time they spent in game. So this is actually what is displayed in the UI, which is over here. Yeah, so that's what's being displayed. So yeah, that's what is being displayed. And this variable checks if the player is loaded. You could just, you don't necessarily need it, but like depending on like the logic you're running, you might end up using this. And then finally, the start game string variable is just basically what does the start button says. So at the start, it's just gonna say start new game because there's no loader save. But if the player does loader save, you probably, in the node graph, you could change it to like continue game. So that would be like for the start main menu over here. This is the variable being referenced. And that is it for the player entity. So next, I'll quickly show the stage entity. Well, these are all just for like the dialogue. So like options, it just shows like, for example, each of the options, like for example, like hi, hello, Okay. And that is being referenced in the dialog box. As you can see, these are all from the stage entity. Okay, so next, the H variable, S variable, and L variable. They're all string lists to show the dialog history, which is being referenced in the UI. The reason we put like a bunch of these empty ones is because it just does not mess up like the display. Since otherwise it's just gonna display variables like this as plain text instead of just putting it as a blank. As you can see, it's like referencing this. So I have it reversed because I'm adding the history at the ID. I mean, we're inserting into the list at ID 0. So the newest history will be at the bottom, and then I'll just keep going up, basically. That's the idea. The day and night variables, I guess, if your game consists of different days and nights, you can basically just increment these as you go. Number 18, you could kind of ignore. It's for the keyboard I showed earlier. And finally, these are just the structures from the advanced data management, where the cursors show up in your game, I guess. So the integer would be like the asset index, and the value type would be the character's name. So you would get an index from here, as I showed earlier. And I have the key types in increasing order, ascending order, because there's a node that lets you sort dictionaries, and it's just more organized if you use that node, since dictionaries are not supposed to be sorted. So you don't want any unexpected behaviors. Yeah, the history just for holding the dialogue history, such as like the speaker name, the dialogue ID, the option ID if it's like a player, which is why we have a Boolean list to check who's the player. So that if it is the player, we're gonna pull the option ID they selected. Otherwise, we just display the dialogue ID with their speaker name. We have a dialogue list. So each of these just contain different dialogues. Note that the current is the dialogue ID. So the first one is 0 because it's first on the list. And the second one is 1 because in the list, the items start from 0 and count up. This is just to help organize stuff. So you could so each one has a unique identifier, and you could reference specific dialogues. And that's just how I ended up doing it. So to edit these, you could either just reset it to the default value, and if you do that, you want to basically edit everything inside the advanced data management. So when you have a new dialogue, you want to basically add it here. And after doing that, you want to update it by resetting to default data. Or you could just like edit it in here. But I guess that's just personal preference because I think it's easier to edit from the advanced data management. The reason I'm not just taking the default values is because if you want to do translations for your stage, you cannot translate default values from advanced data management. So you might run into issues there. So it's best just have it as a variable on the stage entity. I haven't showed this one yet, I think. So for the dialogue structure, the key type is basically what the speaker is saying. And then these values are just the different options the player can select and respond to. So for example, this is the NPC saying hello. And the player can just respond saying hi, hello, hey. And then here is the integer list. And each of these integers reference a different dialog ID, which is like this thing. So for example, if you say hi, it'll take you to dialog ID number 1 from your dialog list, which is this one. And if you say hello, it'll take the number 2 and so on, depending on what numbers you put here. The speaker data uses an integer to basically reference the character structure. After you sort it in ascending order, this would be 2 would be this one, because it starts from 0, so it would be 0, 1, 2. And then so you could then get the data for the speaker sprite and the speaker name. Cutscene is if the other players in a cutscene for this dialogue. The camera is just the, I guess if you want the player to change to an object camera during the dialogue, you want to like put the GUID of your camera. So how that works is, let's say this is your camera. So I just have an empty model here, and then we have we have to add the object camera component. This is the camera's name, and we want to select our camera. So the camera we select, we basically want these ranges to be fixed so that the camera doesn't move around. Interrupt dialogue. So this one means like for this specific dialogue, are we exiting the dialogue? If this is yes, the player is actually going to be forced exited. And this is for if you want to do other gameplay loops in your game, other than just like a visual novel story. The UI animation index is for playing in the full animation in the player's UI. So I've already put all the possible full screen animations in the interface layout. As you can see, I have it all here. So if you want to add it to the dialog, you just take the index from here and just copy it into here. And finally, for these two teleports, they're just checking if you want to teleport a player. It's not super necessary, but it can help to make certain logic like faster to quickly pull up. Like if you want your teleport between these places often. And so you can just quickly check the structure to see if you should teleport the player. Next, I'm going to show the preset point management. This is just an easy way to track specific areas on your map. So to easily differentiate between different locations is putting them on different axes and completely different ranges. Like you can see, like the Y range is completely different for each, so you could just check that in the node graph to see where the player is. So this is important because some logic needs the player to be low let it run, such as like floating interaction pages, and which is pretty important here. So I have an instant skill, and under the animation editor, I put the node graph so that when the skill is cast, the node graph will run. And in the node graph, we're just sending a signal to the server node graph to basically let it know that the skill has been cast. And so the signal is just this. And this is being referenced in this other node graph called main menu. So this node graph is for starting up the main menu screen. So when the player entity is created, since it's a single player game, we just reference player ID is 1. We're gonna create a timer called pre-skill check. So it casts us 1 second after the player is loaded. So after the player is loaded and this timer is triggered, we're gonna create a custom skill instance. So the skill instance is actually just for the load detection skill. And we're gonna store the skill instance ID in the no-graph variable, which is an integer. And we will also make sure to set it to public so that it can be edited in game. And so that means it has a green check mark. And then we're gonna start another timer on loop every 0.3 seconds. So when it's called spawn, so like when this timer gets triggered, we're gonna attempt to cast the specified skill instance. Because how it works is if the player is actually loaded, it will cast, but if they're not loaded, it won't even cast. So I just keep looping until it gets casted. So how do we know if it's cast is by using the signal we made earlier. And if it actually has, the skill has been cast, we just stop the timer, store the custom skill instance, set the custom variable for on the player for loaded to yes, and we just initiate the floating interaction page since it's safe to do so now. And we also start up the main saves. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this since I guess it depends for your game and you don't necessarily need it. You could look, I've posted the assets on the resource centers. You could study the different logic yourself. As I will try to focus this video on mostly just the dialogue system and the save slots. That is it for like how to check if the player is loaded. I won't go into too much detail with how the main menu works. I have another video on that. But I'll quickly point out that when the player starts the game, you want to send the signal for the dialogue. So basically load the first dialogue. And we also want to change the start game button to continue game, since now they will have a save. Now that they have progress in the game. Okay, so we're checking if the button name is already continue game, and if it's not, we just change it to continue game. So now I'm just going to go on to explain the dialogue system. Alright, so when that signal gets sent, we're going to use this event node to monitor that signal. First, we want to check that the event source and signal source entity are the same using a double branch. And then we just want to store a few of these into our no-graph variable so we could later reference it for other logic. And then we're going to we're going to monitor the signal for interrupt dialogue. Before I forget, let me just show this quickly. So the signal stores like the current is for the dialogue ID. Cutscene is if the player's in a cutscene or not. And interrupt dialogue is if you should cut off this dialogue. And select the option ID is just like what the player selected. And then previous is just the previous dialogue ID. And for the no-graph variables, it's just these three. So the current is for the dialogue ID. Select the option, which option the player selected. And then previous is for the previous dialogue ID. Now we're monitoring the signal for interrupt dialogue, so that if it's yes, we want to close the floating interaction page and we set the player camera to follow entity. And if it's no, we check if they're in a cutscene. It's not super necessary, so I did not write logic for this, but so the default is that there's no cutscene. And since there's no cutscene, we're just gonna fill the dialog box. So what this does is just updates the floating interaction page UI with the current dialogue. And we get that information by basically from the we want to check the dialogue list variable from the stage entity. And we want to grab an ID using the current no-graph variable. And then we're going to split the structure for the dialogue. It uses out all that information I talked about earlier. and it fills the box with it. The dictionary, just like what the speaker is saying and the different options. Current dialogue number. I've been calling it dialogue ID, but yeah. And then I'm gonna open this composite note to explain what this basically does. So we're gonna grab the dictionary from this dialogue structure, and we're gonna use that to basically show the different options, the different like response options the player can pick. And we're also showing the current dialogue, like what the speaker's saying. And from the other information, we could like basically just say like, we could get the speaker information here, and then we also want to set the current custom variable, which is the dialogue ID, to the current one. And after that, remember how we had like an object camera? This is for seeing like, let's say we have like a camera here. We could use this information to basically change the camera to follow that specific entity. And for next, after that, we want to add the dialogue to history. So what this does is we take the structure of the history structure from the stage entity, we split the structure, and we basically want to insert the current dialogue into the list at ID 0 for each. So we get all this data from that structure we split earlier. So the dialogue, so number 2 is the speaker ID, number 1 dialogue ID. And for option ID, this really only applies to the player, like what they select. So we're just gonna put a placeholder just to keep all the list sizes the exact same, which makes it easier to keep track of. And then we're gonna, for the Boolean list is player, we're obviously gonna just say no, since this is the character speaking. After we sort the character list by ascending order, we want to insert the speaker's name into this list. So this list is actually what is being displayed in the UI. While these lists were for just storing it into the structure, which we can use later on in our save slots. As you can see, these are the variables, this SHL. L is just for storing the semicolon, and just to keep it, make it look nicer, mostly, but yeah. So we basically update the UI using our history structure. Since right after we stored it inside ID0, now we could just like get that value again from ID0. And then we basically just get all the information we need. And so we're able to display the history in the UI. I'm gonna show what this little composite node is. It's just for playing an animation in the UI. It's like for 2 seconds, because it starts the timer right away, and when this timer gets triggered, the UI animation is just turned off. So it's just to quickly play that animation and run the logic, so I just made that a composite node. I think that's the basic rundown for that. And now I'm gonna show different things the player can click on the dialogue box. So let me go back to the manage UI group. I see under the dialogue box, there's like save history settings, and obviously there's 3 options. First, we check this the right page, and if it's the dialogue box page, we want to check, make a multiple branches to check which index is being triggered. So these 3 at the bottom are for showing the save, little history, etc. So when the player presses the 3 buttons at the bottom, it just shows them this floating interaction page, which will be these 3 buttons. So what this shows would be this menu screen. And as you can see, it has a save history and stats, and that's basically it. So I'm just going to talk more about the options. So if it's any of these buttons, they each reference a different option and we're going to get the options from the structure we split. Also other information, like if there's a cutscene, interrupt dialogue. Since also we just want to store the previous. We want to store the dialogue ID as previous here. So since these each reference a different option, we first get to the different options and we are gonna just put it into the respective, I guess, logic trees. Also, let me quickly show this console notes and just to not confuse people. So it's just for the getting corresponds values from lists, and it goes from 0 to ID 0 to 2, and that's basically it. Okay, so since all the logic is the same here, basically, I'm just gonna show the first branch. So we're gonna change the player variable selected to yes because they've selected an option, and then we're going to add what they selected to the previous choice variable, which is on the stage entity, and then we're gonna send the signal to basically send the player to the next dialogue, and we get all this information from the dialogue structure split. So an option ID is just like which one they selected. So the first one is just 0, second 1, and the last one is 2. That's basically it. And then we're going to turn off their options. I mean, we're going to set the options to yes. So what this does is basically it just basically just hides it. I mean, it just hides all 3 of them from the screen, and so the player can't press anything. And then we're gonna start a 1-second timer, so that after this timer ends, we're gonna enable the options again, so the player can select something new. And then after that, we're gonna use the no graph variables to basically add that selection to the history. Since we changed to a new dialogue, this is where the previous custom variable comes in, and we can add it to the history. So this works basically the exact same as our other node, except this time it's for the players, what the player selected. So I'm just gonna show what changed. So since it's the player, we're gonna insert a yes boolean into the is player boolean list. And the speaker name, we're just gonna, it doesn't matter since we know it's the player, so we're just gonna put a placeholder value. And then for the dialogue ID, we just put the ID for that dialogue. And the option ID is just which one the player selected, which we're inserting into the list. And the rest is it's more or less the same, so I'm not going to explain too much, but this just displays it in the UI. And afterwards, we have these double branches to basically reference the teleports nodes from the structure. So if we're teleporting, it checks if the player is being teleported. Basically, that's it. So if it's like, if this value is a yes, we teleport them to B3. If this one's a yes, they get teleported B2. Otherwise, nothing happens. That is mostly it for the dialogue system. Next, I'll talk about the save slots. So these blue no graphs are for calculating the timestamps and storing it into the variable. So like these timestamp variables will store this data. What it stores is just the current real lifetime and also how much time the player spent in game, which we're gonna calculate here. And this is the page that has like all the save slots. And each of these reference a different save slot. And for each save slot, we could either load or save. So that's basically all the buttons. And after the player loads a save, we want to change the start game button to continue game, since now they have a save. Then we show that in the UI, just so there's a visual reference. As you can see, you could either override the save slot or save, and each of these are for a different save slot. And that is basically what's being referenced in the node graph. Now I'll show each of these composite nodes. So when the player presses save, what we're gonna do is first we want to just assemble the structure. So these values don't matter, just the default stuff. And we're going to reference the save timestamp. So this one is just we're setting it to yes to say that the save slot is now being used. And then we're gonna modify our structure with the data we're saving. So what happens here is we're just gonna save the dialogue ID, where the player is. If you need to, you can save the day or night. And then how many remaining revives the player has. And then for these NAS4, it's just pulled directly from the history structure, which I explained earlier. And then what happens when the player loads a save, it's basically we get the save name, and then we get the list of the save. Okay, let me give a rundown for this. So under advanced data structures, we have these saves, right? So the save slot saves all this information. And it's basically on the player entity over here. Yes. And as you can see, each one have a length of 1. And what we're doing is basically we're checking that the save exists. So if it has a value greater or equal to 1, that means there is an existing save slot for this specific save. We're going to load the data from that save if it exists. So such if we get all this data. This is all we want to load the current dialogue IDs. We also want to reset any other logic that might break. We want to set the player's remaining revives to what we have from the save slot. And next, we basically want to refresh the history with our save slots history. So first we want to basically set the history and the UI to completely be blank. And then we want to reset the history structure to be blank too. And then next we want to do a finite loop to basically loop through the whole list from the save slot structure. It basically just goes through the whole list. And for each value, it checks if it's the player or if it's not the player, which is where this is player Boolean list comes in. Because if it is the player, we want to use the composite node for the player for adding the selection. This is basically working backwards from before. And then we could get all these values from our structure. We get the ID from these calculations to basically this just reverses the list. So basically we want it to be in order. We just update these values into the history, basically. That's a basic rundown, I think. Also, we're going to send the signal for the most recent dialogue. And we're going to load, after the history is all loaded, we're going to send that signal. And then we're going to load the saved point. Okay, so what this does is basically, it checks the save location and checks it checks which of the points it's the closest to on the Y component. It's just to calculate where the player is, so we teleport them there. I'm not going to go too much detail, so these composite nodes are just for like teleporting the player to that preset point. And I'll also activate VIII. Okay, these are hard-coded, but I also made a generic one where you could add in your own point and background music you want to play. And then we're gonna start a timer to run other logic. So after all that happens, we start this timer. And when this timer gets triggered, we're just gonna reset the player default entity. That is it for that. Next, I'm gonna show the general saves. The save and exit one. So I'll just quickly go over these. So what the general save does is just, it checks how many save slots we use and loads the player's main settings. So first we check that the save exists, and if it does, we load the settings such as like first person music and the volume. We also want the game time elapsed, how much time they spent in game. And all of these are just checking if the save slots are being used for each of these slots. So that's from 1 to 5. And then we load in the timestamps for each of the saves here. After which we want to set the player's nickname by getting their player nickname. And that is basically it for this. Next, for saving and exiting, we're gonna save like the settings into the structure. And then, so all of these are just for the save slots. Let me just organize this a little. Yeah, all of these are for the save slots, and these are for like the timestamps. So first we just want to like set the save custom variable. So this one chip, chip underscore one. Okay, so this is not, you don't really have to get, this is for more like multiplayer, but so you could probably not do this, but it works the same. So I guess the player entity, and then it's gonna assemble the structure for the general save. And then here we could change like the player's settlement status. And then we're gonna change the game time elapsed by adding it with the variable we already have. So just to update it before we exit the game. And then we modify the structure. So after all this logic is complete, we want to settle the stage. And that is basically it. I think I forgot to mention, so I'll quickly go over it now. So these are the save data structures. The first 5, they stores like the settings for the players. 6 stores like how many save slots are being used and which ones are being used. And then 7 through 11, these are just the different timestamps for each save slot. And then finally 12 is just how much time the player has spent in this game. And then for the save slots, we just save these last 4 save like the history for the dialogues. And then you can also add more information depending on the game. And they're all structure listed here. Also, don't forget to enable the save in game. And you also want to set a corresponding structure for each. So that is basically it. And I posted this asset in the resource center, so you could also go into and look yourself as you watch the video, or you could also follow the little outline I made. And I hope this helps with your stages, and thank you for watching.